Josephine Calloway never meant to fall in love in Wyoming. She had come to Laramie in the spring of 1878 to escape a future that felt like a prison. Back in Boston, her father had already chosen her husband, a man with gray hair, heavy rings on his fingers, and a voice that sounded more like a business deal than affection. He was 53 years old. Josephine was only 20. Her life had been arranged like furniture in her father's drawing room. Clean, proper, loveless. So she boarded a train and did something no one expected. She ran. When she stepped down onto the dusty platform in Laramie, the cold air hit her like a slap. The land stretched wide and wild around her. No polished streets, no soft music drifting from parlor windows. Just open sky, wooden buildings, and men who looked like they belonged to the earth itself. But she clutched her carpet bag tightly and told herself she was not afraid. She had accepted a teaching position at the small schoolhouse on the edge of town. It was her freedom, her chance to be Miss Calloway instead of someone's wife. The school board chairman, Mr. Peterson, greeted her with stiff politeness and drove her through town in a rattling buggy. She saw the saloon with swinging doors, the general store with dusty windows, cowboys tying horses to hitching posts. Everything looked rough and unfinished, but it felt honest. Mrs. Whitaker's boarding house became her new home. The widow was kind but strict. Breakfast at 6, dinner at 6, church on Sundays. No gentlemen callers in private rooms. Josephine agreed to every rule without complaint. She had not come all this way to cause trouble. The next morning, she walked to the schoolhouse before sunrise. It was small and plain, white paint peeling, windows shining from recent cleaning. Inside, wooden benches faced a chalkboard and a sturdy teacher's desk. The smell of chalk and old wood filled the air. She placed her books carefully in neat stacks. She ran her hand across the desk and smiled softly. This was hers. She was adjusting the slate boards when the door creaked open behind her. A tall shadow filled the doorway. "Pardon me, miss." The voice was deep, steady, carrying the rough sound of a man who worked outdoors every day. Josephine turned slowly. He stepped inside and removed his hat. Dark hair fell slightly across his forehead. His skin was sun-browned. His shoulders were broad beneath a worn jacket. His eyes were gray, like a storm building over open land. "I'm the new teacher," she said quickly, straightening her posture. "Josephine Calloway." "Vaughn Daniels," he replied. "Been fixing your roof. Still a weak spot near the back corner." His hands were large and marked with calluses, not soft like the men in Boston. His boots were dusty. Everything about him spoke of hard work and long days. "I appreciate your efforts, Mr. Daniels," she answered politely. A faint smile touched his mouth. "Just Vaughn is fine." She turned back to her books. "I prefer proper address." A low chuckle escaped him. "City folk," he said. "You're a long way from Boston." Her fingers paused. "This is my home now," she replied firmly. Something shifted in his expression then. Not mockery, not judgment. Something like respect. "Well, Miss Calloway," he said softly. "Welcome to Wyoming." He stepped outside again, climbing the ladder to the roof. She could hear the steady rhythm of hammer against wood. Despite herself, she found her eyes drifting to the window more than once. By Sunday, Josephine had memorized the names of all 37 students, children of ranchers, shop owners, and widows, some nearly her own age. She was determined to prove herself. At church, whispers followed her. Curious glances, warm smiles. This town watched everything. After the service, she was invited to Sunday dinner at the Thompson house. The home was loud and full of life. Children ran between tables. Women carried plates of food. Men spoke about cattle and weather. And then the back door opened. Vaughn Daniels stepped inside carrying firewood. Their eyes met across the room. Miss Calloway," he greeted simply. Mrs. Thompson beamed proudly. "Vaughn owns one of the largest cattle ranches around." He shifted slightly, uncomfortable with praise. Josephine tried to focus on her plate, but she felt his presence the entire meal. Later, when the gathering ended, Vaughn insisted on walking her back to the boarding house. "It's not proper for a lady to walk alone," he said calmly. "I can manage," she replied. "I don't doubt it." They walked in silence for a few moments. The sky was painted with soft orange and purple. The town quieted around them. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked. "My first day does not frighten me," she answered. Then, after a pause, "Perhaps only a little. I reckon you'll do just fine." They reached the boarding house steps too quickly. Yet she turned to thank him and realized he stood closer than expected. "Good luck, Miss Calloway." His eyes held hers a second longer than necessary. She felt something stir in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. Monday arrived with bright sunlight and pounding nerves. The children filled the classroom with energy and noise. Josephine's voice rang clear and steady as she began her lessons. By midday, she felt confidence bloom inside her. The children respected her. They listened. Days turned into weeks. Autumn colored the land in gold and red. Josephine settled into routine, teaching, grading, reading by lamplight. And Vaughn Daniels appeared now and then. Sometimes he rode through town and tipped his hat. Sometimes he stopped to ask about the school roof or the weather. Every time, and her heart behaved in ways she could not control. In late October, the town held a harvest social at the hall. Mrs. Whitaker insisted Josephine attend. "You're part of this town now," she said. Josephine wore a green dress she had nearly left behind in Boston. She pinned her hair more softly than usual. When she entered the hall, lantern light glowed against wooden walls. Laughter filled the air. Music began to play. She had just accepted a cup of punch when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You look lovely tonight." She turned. Vaughn stood there in a clean white shirt and dark vest, clean-shaven, hair brushed back, still rugged, still unmistakably himself. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels." "May I have this dance?" Her breath caught. The fiddles began a lively tune. He placed one hand respectfully at her waist, and his other hand held hers steady. They moved together among spinning skirts and stamping boots. "You dance well," she said softly. "My mother insisted," he replied with a small smile. The music slowed. Without words, he drew her slightly closer. They moved in a gentle waltz. His eyes never left hers. "Why Wyoming?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. "In Boston, my future was decided for me," she admitted. "An arranged marriage, a life chosen by someone else." His jaw tightened. "You ran." "Yes." "Brave." "Necessary." The dance ended, but they remained near each other for the rest of the evening, talking, laughing, sharing pieces of themselves. When he walked her home that night, stars glittered above them like scattered silver. At the steps, he took her hand. May I call on you properly?" "I would like that." He smiled slowly. "Good night, Josephine." It was the first time he spoke her name that way, soft, personal, and it stayed with her long after she closed her bedroom door. She did not know then that the path she had chosen would lead her somewhere far deeper than freedom. It would lead her to a moment she would never forget. The moment her first kiss would be stolen. Winter did not arrive gently in Laramie. It came with sharp wind and skies that looked heavy with warning. The first snow fell in early November, covering the plains in a quiet white sheet. The schoolhouse grew colder each day. and Josephine found herself arriving early to light the stove before her students came stamping in with red cheeks and frozen fingers. Vaughn began stopping by more often, under the excuse of checking the windows and reinforcing the door frames. He never stayed long, but his presence filled the small room in a way that made it hard for her to breathe normally. One Saturday morning, Josephine arrived to find him already inside, hammer in hand, sealing a draft near the back wall. "Mrs. Thompson mentioned you were worried about the cold," he said without turning. "Didn't want the children freezing through lessons." "You are very thoughtful, Mr. Daniels." "Vaughn," he corrected softly. She pretended not to hear. They worked side by side for hours. She organized readers and writing slates, but he secured shutters and checked the roof beams. The rhythm of their movements felt easy, natural. When she climbed onto a small stool to reach the upper shelf, it wobbled beneath her. Before she could lose balance, his hands caught her waist firmly. Her breath stopped. He steadied her and did not let go right away. His fingers were warm, even through the layers of fabric. She could feel the strength in his grip. "Careful," he said quietly. "I am quite capable," she answered, though her voice came out softer than intended. "I know you are." He helped her down slowly. When her boots touched the floor, they were standing close, too close. The air between them felt charged, heavy. His eyes searched hers. "Josephine," he said her name like it mattered. Her heart pounded hard against her ribs. He lifted his hand slowly, almost as if asking permission, and brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face. His touch was gentle, careful. She should step back. She should remind him of propriety, but she did not move. The door suddenly burst open, banging against the wall. Tommy Thompson rushed inside with his mother close behind. "Miss Calloway!" the boy shouted, breathless. They sprang apart at once. Mrs. Thompson's eyes moved from Vaughn to Josephine and back again. Understanding settled on her face, followed by a small, knowing smile. "We brought extra fabric for the curtains," she said calmly. "It gets mighty cold in here." "Thank you," Josephine replied, cheeks burning. Vaughn cleared his throat and stepped away to gather his tools. That night, Josephine lay awake in her narrow bed at the boarding house, staring at the ceiling, and her mind replayed the moment over and over. The feel of his hands, the way he had said her name. In Boston, such closeness would have been scandalous. Here, it felt inevitable. December came with a harshness no one could ignore. Snowstorms rolled across the plains without warning. Ranchers worked long hours to protect their cattle. Families stayed indoors as much as possible. Vaughn's visits grew less frequent, but when he did appear, he brought small gifts: fresh eggs, a jar of honey, a book he had found in Cheyenne for her advanced students. "I saw it and thought of you," he said simply. She treasured every small offering. 3 days before Christmas, the worst blizzard in years struck the territory. The wind howled like something alive. Snow buried fences and drifted high against doors. School was canceled. Church was canceled. And the town disappeared beneath white silence. Josephine sat by the boarding house window, watching the storm rage. She worried about Vaughn at his ranch miles away. On Christmas Eve, the storm finally weakened. The town gathered quietly in the boarding house parlor, since travel was still dangerous. They shared simple food and modest gifts. Josephine gave handmade bookmarks to each resident. In return, she received small tokens of kindness. As the clock neared 9, a firm knock sounded at the front door. Mrs. Whitaker opened it with surprise. Vaughn stood on the porch, covered in snow, breath fogging in the cold air. Josephine's heart leapt into her throat. "Evening," he said, stamping snow from his boots. Hope I'm not intruding." "You'll freeze to death if you stay out there," Mrs. Whitaker said, pulling him inside. But his eyes found Josephine at once. "I couldn't let Christmas pass without seeing you," he said softly. Later, when the others began to retire, he asked Mrs. Whitaker for a moment of privacy on the front porch. The widow agreed with strict instruction that the door remain open. Outside, the world glowed under moonlight, reflecting off snow. "You shouldn't have risked coming," Josephine said. "Had to." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. She accepted it with trembling hands. Inside was a delicate silver locket, etched with tiny flowers. When she opened it, a pressed wildflower rested within. "It's from the lake," he explained quietly. "From the day we picnicked." Tears filled her eyes. "It's beautiful." "May I?" he asked. She turned and lifted her hair, yet his fingers brushed the back of her neck as he fastened the chain. The touch sent warmth through her, despite the cold air. When she faced him again, they stood inches apart. "Josephine," he began, voice low, "these months with you have changed something in me." Her heart beat so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "I care for you more than I ever expected." Before she could answer, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was sudden, soft but unprepared. Her eyes widened in shock. Her body froze. When he pulled back, he saw tears forming in her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I shouldn't have taken that liberty." She shook her head, struggling for words. "It was my first kiss," she whispered. He stared at her, surprised. "Your first?" She nodded, embarrassed. "In Boston. Well, young ladies do not, without proper understanding." Understanding dawned in his expression. He stepped closer again, slower this time. "I'm sorry it was rushed," he said gently. "It should have been something worth remembering." He lifted his hand and cupped her cheek tenderly. "Let me show you how love is meant to feel." This time, when he kissed her, it was different. He moved slowly, giving her time to breathe, to choose. His lips were warm and certain. His arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer without force. Josephine's hands trembled before resting lightly against his chest. She felt the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. The world around them faded into cold air and quiet night. When they parted, both were breathless. "I love you," he said, voice steady despite emotion. "I think I have since the first day I saw you standing in that schoolhouse." Her fear melted into something deeper. "I love you too," she answered. From inside, Mrs. Whitaker cleared her throat loudly. Vaughn stepped back with a reluctant smile. "I'll call tomorrow, if the roads allow." The days after Christmas passed in a glow of quiet happiness. Vaughn visited whenever possible. They spoke openly now of the future. On New Year's Eve, the town gathered in the church hall. Music and laughter filled the room. Near midnight, Vaughn led Josephine to a quiet corner. "I have something to ask you," he said seriously. She felt her pulse quicken. "I don't have riches," he continued. "My ranch is still growing. The house is small." She squeezed his hands. "That does not matter. I love you, Josephine." "Will you marry me?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Yes." Joy lit his face as he pulled her close. Around them, the town counted down the final seconds of the year. When midnight struck, they sealed their promise with a kiss beneath ringing bells and cheering voices. Josephine believed her story was unfolding exactly as it should. She did not yet know how fragile happiness could feel, or how quickly love could be tested. Spring arrived slowly in Wyoming, but when it came, it changed everything. Snow melted into rushing streams. Wildflowers pushed through the cold earth. The plains turned from white to green almost overnight. It felt like the land itself was waking up. Josephine and Vaughn were married in April in the small white church at the center of Laramie. The entire town attended. Ranchers in clean shirts, mothers with polished boots, children whispering and smiling from the front pews. Josephine wore a simple white dress with lace along the sleeves. Wildflowers rested in her hair instead of jewels. She did not need anything more. When she walked down the aisle, Vaughn stood waiting for her with eyes full of something steady and sure. He did not look at her like she was something fragile to own. He looked at her like she was his equal. When the preacher declared them husband and wife, Vaughn kissed her gently, slowly, with care, not rushed, not stolen. The town clapped and cheered. Josephine felt no fear, only certainty. She moved into the ranch house a week later. It was smaller than the home she had grown up in, but it was warm. Wooden floors, a stone fireplace, a porch that looked out over endless land. The first months of marriage were not perfect. Ranch life was harder than she imagined. Dawn came early. Some mornings Vaughn was gone before sunrise. Storms could change plans in an instant. Cattle fell ill. Fences broke. Money did not always come in the way it should. There were nights when Vaughn returned exhausted, shoulders heavy from the weight of responsibility. Josephine learned to read the lines in his face. She learned when to speak and when to simply sit beside him. But through every challenge, he never raised his voice at her, and never treated her as lesser, never made her feel small. He listened, and Josephine, who had once fled a life chosen for her, realized she was now building one side by side with a man who respected her strength. She finished the school term before resigning. The children cried when she told them she would no longer teach full-time. Several parents asked if she would continue lessons privately. "I will," she promised. Education had been her freedom. She would not let it disappear. By summer, the ranch felt more like home than any place she had known before. She rode alongside Vaughn to check fences. She learned the names of the ranch hands. She kept careful records of supplies and expenses. Some evenings, they would sit on the porch watching the sunset stretch across the plains in deep golden red. On one such evening, Vaughn looked at her thoughtfully. "Any regrets?" he asked. She knew what he meant. Boston, the life she left behind, the comfort, the security. Josephine rested her head against his shoulder. "Not one," she said truthfully. He kissed her temple gently. Yet not all stories stay calm forever. Late that summer, a letter arrived. The envelope bore her father's familiar handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The message was short. He had heard of her marriage, heard she was living on a cattle ranch in the Wyoming Territory. His words were sharp and cold. He called her foolish, said she had thrown away her future for a reckless life among cowboys. He warned her that hardship would come, that love fades, that she would regret her choice. Josephine folded the letter slowly. For a brief moment,